In this video, I will show you how to get comfortable with drawing as you build up your own visual vocabulary, a set of simple icons that you can draw with ease. Let's start building. The most important thing to understand about drawing is that making marks is the easy part. The real skill is learning how to see. For us, that means learning how to look at an object, or maybe even imagine an object in your mind, and break that object down into simple curved and straight lines, like we talked about in the last video. To help you develop that ability to see and break down objects, we'll look at 3 different stages during which you can build your drawing skills while simultaneously building your visual vocabulary. We will look at what you can do before a note-taking session, what you can do during a note-taking session, and what you can do after a note-taking session to build up that vocabulary. Let's start with what you can do in preparation of a note-taking session. Begin by brainstorming keywords related to the topic that you'll be taking notes on. This can simply be a long bulleted list of words, and after you've brainstormed as many of those keywords as you can, just pick one at a time and practice drawing that object. Feel free to iterate here, trying out a number of different approaches to drawing that particular object. And also, don't be afraid of doing an image search online, and maybe even adding cartoon or icon after that keyword in order to get a simplified version of that particular object. Once you've found a version of that object that you like, and you've practiced drawing that version a few times, then store that practiced version for future reference, maybe in a notebook dedicated to your visual vocabulary, or maybe with a post-it note that you can add to some dedicated wall space. Continue that process with each other keyword until you've got a number of drawn elements under your belt. Those will give you confidence once you jump into a visual note-taking session. Once you start taking your visual notes, hopefully you will be able to use many of those elements that you've already practiced. But if an object or an idea comes up that you haven't drawn before, then what you can do is picture that object in your mind, break it down, and then draw it as best as you can. As you might guess, that mental envisioning and breaking down of an object in order to draw it will temporarily take your attention away from the person you're listening to or the book that you're reading. So be careful not to spend too much time on that process. You could even add a constraint to your note-taking process that you won't draw anything that you haven't drawn before. You could always just write the word for that thing and leave some blank space so that you can tackle the drawing part later. That brings us to the post-note-taking stage. In this stage, you can look back at some notes that you've taken and list out what you wish you could have drawn but didn't know how to. Then you can go through that similar process that we talked about before of practicing that new element and adding it to your visual vocabulary. You can imagine that after just a few iterations of this cycle, you'll have a pretty solid visual vocabulary going for you. I also wanted to mention something about icons that works in your favor here. A single icon can be used to represent a number of different ideas. That makes them incredibly reusable. I have added a video below that shows a number of examples of that reusability, so be sure to check that out. And before moving on, I wanted to mention 2 specific ways that you can use images like these while taking your visual notes. And both of these things I alluded to in the last module. The first is using images as containers to help separate one idea from another. You can achieve a similar effect of separation using simple images as bullets. And in both cases, you help to separate ideas while also tapping into that visual memory and visual processing power. Below this video, you'll find a set of activities to help you start building your own visual vocabulary and start applying those visual elements in your work. So check out those activities, and then I'll see you in the next lesson.